Have you ever heard the voice of God? What does it sound like? I want to take you back to a story from a few thousand years ago that I believe has deep resonance for this Rosh Hashanah, and particularly for the world in which we are all searching a little bit harder to hear the voice of God. It's a story about Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet, who lived during a time of great tumult for the Jewish people. Idolatry was rampant. And although following the historic showdown at Mount Carmel, the people declared their faith of God there, Elijah's life was threatened by Jezebel, the queen of Israel. He ran away and found himself at Mount Sinai, the location of the revelation where God spoke to the nation of Israel. He was seeking the voice of God and reassurance in his mission. And the prophets tell us that a great wind blew, and God was not there. An earthquake shook the ground, and God was not there. A fire came down and consumed the earth, and God was not there. But then Elijah the prophet heard the kol dimama daka, the small, still voice. And he knew that it was the voice of God. He understood that in the small, still voice, God was still speaking to him. It's that small, still voice that we hope to hear particularly during the holiday season. In fact, in the hallowed prayer, Unasana Tokef, we acknowledge its existence and yearn to tap into this divine frequency in our lives. And do we hear the small, still voice? And what does it sound like? I believe that we gained a renewed appreciation for the voice of God in our lives this year. We actually experience it every single day and every moment. Do we hear it? The voice is manifest in the breaths we take every day. This year, we've become much more attuned to the gift of every breath. Before the pandemic rocked our world, we often neglected it, except for the very beginning and end of life. We celebrate when a baby is born and exclaim, Mazel Tov, as the baby first inhales its independent breath on earth. And we count the final halting breaths that a human being takes at the very end of his life. But all too often, we've lost touch with the breaths that we're taking every single day. There is not a single person who at some moment over the past 8 months has not paused to reflect on the gift of a simple breath. The race for ventilators early on made this awareness even more acute. And if there's any holiday that reinforces for us the gift of every breath we take, not only at birth and not only at death, but every day, it is Rosh Hashanah. Even more importantly, Rosh Hashanah teaches us that this breath is the small, still voice of God in our lives, believing in us, challenging us, and calling us to listen and respond to his voice in our lives. What do we celebrate on Rosh Hashanah? The Zohar, the great mystical work, explains that Rosh Hashanah represents the birth of humanity. On the day of our creation, God breathed into humanity the breath of life, our souls. And on this day, we are uniquely positioned to tap into the essential element of God endowing us with his life in every breath we take. Rabbi Moshe Wolfson explains so beautifully that for this reason, the main mitzvah of the holiday is a respiratory one, the blowing of the shofar. It can only be fulfilled through the gift of the breath that God endows within us. Every inhale and every exhale is the small, still voice of God that speaks to us. And I believe God speaks to us in the small, still voice of every breath in three ways. One is the breath that we take reminds us of God's love. The second is the breath that we take gives us God's lift. And the third is the breath that we take inspires us to share God's light. There's a story which I've shared in smaller circles that reminds us of this gift of every breath. A 93-year-old man this summer recovered from COVID, and on his way out of the hospital, he was given the bill for 1 day on a ventilator. When he looked at the $5,000 bill, he started to cry, and the doctor asked him, "Are you crying because you can't pay the bill?" He answered, "I don't cry because of the money I have to pay. I can pay all the money. I cry because I've been breathing God's air for 93 years, but I never pay for it. It takes $5,000 to use a ventilator in the hospital for 1 day. Do you know how much I owe God? I didn't thank God for that before." It has been a year when we and others have sometimes searched for the voice of God. Yet as King David says in the very last Psalm, 150, Kol haneshama tahalelka, that in every breath I praise God. I recognize that God is holding my soul, our souls, and our bodies together to enable us to be on this earth. King David recognized God in every aspect of his life, the valleys, the peaks, the challenges, always remembering that God is in every breath that he gives us. And in that breath, he's reinforcing his love for each of us. And God is saying, "I'm with you. I love you. I'm thinking about you. I have not abandoned you." But in every breath, God is also challenging us. Our lives did not go as planned this year. And yet, how do we respond? It's fully understandable to ask why something happens in our lives, to mourn, to cry, to be angry. Yet we are called to realize in time that God may be moving us in a new direction to realize our unique divine potential. This idea is crystallized in a story in the language of the Sycamore by Lisa Wingate. A pastor is speaking in the presence of his grandson Caleb, who a few years ago was a star football player in high school. Tragically, he got into a car wreck and sustained internal injuries and serious burns. The minister, Caleb's grandfather, reflected from the pulpit. "You remember when that accident occurred? I questioned God. I stumbled in my faith. I looked at my grandson, Caleb, in the hospital room, and I looked at the bed, and I asked, why? Here's a young boy who played linebacker on the football team, who made good grades and earned a scholarship to college, who never disappointed his parents a day in his life, a perfect son, a perfect grandson, everything we hoped for. And now the doctors were telling us that he wasn't going to be perfect anymore. If he recovered, he was going to have scars on his arms and legs from the burns. And I said, God, why? Why would you take this young, good-looking, beautiful boy and leave him the rest of his life with scars?" Then he turned to his grandson and said, "God doesn't always answer our questions right away. Sometimes he leaves us to think and ponder, to find our way back on our own. Sometimes the answers are so ordinary, you could walk by without noticing." The pastor lined up several old containers, a rusted tin bucket, a dented flower pot, an old saucepan, and a new child beach pail along the railing. The other day I was outside, I was walking in the back, and I saw a number of buckets and pans the kids had left there, and I looked around and I noticed something. The perfect buckets had caught rainwater and held that water until it became stagnant and black. And all the grass around those perfect buckets was dead. The containers that were dented or cracked or had holes probably caught rainwater as well, but they poured the rainwater out through the holes. There was no stagnant water in them, and all the grass around them was growing. And he said it's the same with people. It's these little nicks and dents and imperfections of spirit that allow us to flow into a thirsty world. It's our scars that enable us to relate to the scars of others. Our suffering that connects us with others who suffer. I don't know why God put scars on my grandson, but I do know that when he becomes a doctor, when he reaches out to those who are wounded and hurting, they're going to realize he's been there. He's going to understand his patients in a way that many doctors never will. And just by virtue of those scars, he's going to show them that life goes on. He's going to be able to flow out into other people in a way that would have been possible if God had left his life perfect. Then he picked up the new plastic bucket and the dented one. Consider for yourselves which life you'd rather have, which vessel you'd rather be, perfect? As he dipped the can and he saw there was blackened with mold, or imperfect. And he showed the inside of the coffee can that was washed clean by the rainwater. Are you ready to hold in everything that comes your way? Or are we ready to pour it out and refill it with new rain? Or are we open to new possibilities? In the imperfections, in the brokenness and the harsh challenges, can we find new opportunities? Will we hear the small, still voice? I believe in many ways we have heard that voice. Until this spring, I would venture that few of us had ever used Zoom or WhatsApp. But we found ways to learn and pray in ways we never thought possible, and discovered ways to support each other. We launched a WhatsApp group, Making Mitzvah Moments. People joined to collectively respond to community needs, which are posted in the group, and proactively seek and ignite mitzvah opportunities. When in-person visits were impossible, we learned how to increase comfort for mourners by creating virtual visits from friends and family from all over the world. But finally, the small, still voice is not only God's love through every breath that we take. It's not only to realize that sometimes through the brokenness, God is giving us a lift. Not to close ourselves off, but to open ourselves to new possibilities. But God is also asking us, if I am giving you breath, I want you to blow that breath out into the world. And I want you, me and you, to take that breath and to give the world new light. A number of years ago, somebody asked Rabbi Avigdor Miller, who was a renowned Torah scholar, what is the one thing I can do during the high holiday season to help my faith for the coming year? What should it be? And he said to them, the best thing that you can do is smile. And he explained. He said there was a business in financial trouble, and the consultants recommended to the owner to let go of a few salespeople. The owner said, that's fine. You can identify a few, but there's one guy I don't want you to get rid of. His name is Mr. Glee. When people come into the store, he just really lifts them up. He makes the most of his sales, and people come into the store just to meet Mr. Glee. Rabbi Miller said, God looks at the world that way. The world is imperfect. The world is in need of healing. The world is in need of hope. And when we are people that smile at others, that lift people up, we're God's partners. And God says, I want you on my team. I need you to help me continue to repair the world. Hearing the small, still voice means harnessing God's breath into ours and sharing his light with the world around us. One of the greatest challenges in this moment is finding creative ways to smile and to lift people up. But the world needs our smiles and spirit more than ever. People are struggling, and a kind gesture, encouraging words can truly change a life. The Torah offers a profound example. The Torah describes a child for whom both parents are convinced, based on his current lifestyle, that he will grow up to be a menace to society, a ben soror more. Both parents must testify to their concerns. He's deemed rebellious, and he's destined for capital punishment. Yet at the last minute, if one of the parents says, I don't want to go through with this, the child is saved. But the question is why? The child has not changed his errant ways. Why does he deserve to be saved? But in essence, the parent is saying, I believe in this child. I believe this child can change. One word of encouragement to this child that he hadn't heard before has the potential to turn his life around. In this moment of greater isolation, increased loneliness, we are tasked to deepen our role in revealing blessings in the world. When God infuses humanity with his breath, he endows us with the power of speech. It's no wonder this holiday, more than any other, is preceded by offerings of blessings to each other. We wish people Shana Tova. When we smile, when we say hello to a person on the street, we're assisting God in spreading this blessing. We're taking his voice and using the breath of life and the power of speech not to divide, not to demean, not to diminish, but to unite, to elevate, and to energize. This small, still voice of God is ever present in each moment and every breath we take. God willing, in the year ahead, we will stay attuned to his love when we take a breath. We will not lament our circumstances, but we will discover in the imperfections of life new possibilities. And finally, we will smile more. We'll be ambassadors of hope, kindness, and joy. God needs us on his team. And God willing, we will experience a time of healing for all humanity, peace and joy for the world in the year ahead. Shana Tova, K'tiva B'Chatima Tova, to you and your families for a wonderful year.